Hello, Poetry Salon listeners. This is Tresha Faye Haefner, founder of the Poetry Salon. And today I am so excited to be interviewing the poet Angela Narciso Torres. And Angela is the author of What Happens Is Neither from Four Way Books, Blood Orange, winner of the 2013 Willow Books Literature Award for Poetry, and the chapbook To the Bone from Sundress Publications 2020. Her recent work appears or is forthcoming in Poetry, Missouri Review, Quarterly West, Portland Review, and Poetry Northwest. A graduate of Warren Wilson MFA program for writers and Harvard Graduate School of Education. Angela has received fellowships from Bread Loaf Writers Conference, Illinois Artists Council, and Ragdale Foundation. She received first prize in the Yates Poetry Prize, W.B. Yeats Society of New York. New City Magazine named her one of Chicago's Lit 50 who really books in Chicago. Born in Brooklyn and raised in Manila, she currently resides in San Diego. She serves as senior and reviews editor for Rhino Poetry. Please welcome Angela Narciso Torres.
Thank you, Tresha. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And one thing that is not in your bio is that recently you had a poem win the Pushcart nomination. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
That is so exciting. I have to tell you, with so many of the poets we interview on the Poetry Salon cast, I've been following you on Facebook and social media. I've read a number of your poems that you post, and I've kind of always had in mind that one day I was going to reach out and ask you to be on the podcast. And then recently I saw that you had won the Pushcart. And I was like, oh, that reminds me, definitely need to have her on the podcast.
Uh-huh.
And then we had someone who had to reschedule and I had to find someone. I was just like, this is my opportunity. So I'm so glad you were able to come talk to us today. And I wonder if you would read that poem, Ode to the Galaxy Typewriter,
Yes.
to get us started. Thank you.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Ode to a Smith Corona Galaxy typewriter. Find me again that teal jewel, buried in father's dust-encrusted cave of poems and pathology, papers tipping in piles, a brown reel churning its mournful symphony. Take me to where the blue hours crawled from yellow yawn to drawl of dusk. Bring out the carriage, whose rise and fall spelled here or gone, asleep, awake, alone, unafraid. Return me to that solar system, that universe of ciphers, symbols, simplest of lullabies, that nightly waterfall of spurts and starts, of mechanized whispers. My father's lips pursed in lamplight, his fingers the blur of 100 woodpeckers. Play me again that skeletal symphony, that tin can tango, jangle of keys, bright ding of bell. O divot, O ink blot, O seed plot of sorrow. O alphabet reliquary, ribcage of memory. If time won't stop, let it slow to the tempo of his staccato, that blue-veined arrhythmia in a corncob of stars.
So much for sharing that. And tell me again, where was it originally published?
This was originally published in the Alaska Quarterly Review. It was the summer and fall issue of 2024 where it came out.
Selected by Danusha Lamiris.
Yes, that's right. She was a guest editor for that issue, and she had asked me to submit a couple poems, and she selected them. And then she had contacted me saying she wanted to nominate it for the Pushcart, and that I would be hearing from them.
That is really fantastic. And we had Danusha on the podcast back in December of 2024.
Wow.
Yeah, she's a fantastic person to be talking to about poetry and life in general.
She is.
And I'm just so curious. For me, the Pushcart has always been this sort of, high bar. What actually wins it? We all want to get nominated, but no one can possibly win one. It's got this mystical level of grandeur to it. And so I'm just curious, what did it feel like to actually win it?
Honestly, it felt like I had won the lottery because I tell everyone, many get nominated, but hardly anyone ever gets picked. It's like the unicorn of poetry awards for me. So I was really surprised. I mean, I was really happy though that Danusha made a push for it because I really admire her and I feel like I really resonate with her poems. And she told me
Yeah.
she felt a connection with this poem, and that made me so happy that she felt that connection.
And I've got my own opinion about why this one got nominated, why it won. But I'm really curious from your perspective, like were you when you finished this, when you sent it off, did you have any, feeling that this one was extra special or in your own opinion, why do you think this one won?
I think just thematically, people are starting to be more curious about analog technology after being immersed in digital technology for the past few decades. And there's a kind of a return, a resistance to digital technology that seems to be in the air. And for me, there a lot of young people don't even know what a typewriter is, but people maybe from our generation feel a need to just slow down and to kind of resist the kind of communication that happens only digitally and leads to a pervasive feeling of disconnection, ironically.
Mhm.
Whereas, going back to the old ways of doing things seems to be just a more authentic human experience. So I like to think that that's part of the appeal of this poem. And I'm
You know,
curious what you think.
Yeah, what do I think? This
Yeah.
is fun. I gotta have you on and we gotta just say nothing but positive things about your work, which is so antithetical for most writers. We're always so critical of our work, but here we get a
I
chance to
know,
come
I
on
know.
and
And
just
it doesn't
talk
have to be a
positive.
stroke fest. It doesn't have to.
Um,
I can take it.
yeah, I know. Just I should warn you, like I'm gonna say a lot of positive things to your face, which sometimes, when it happens for me, sometimes I'm just like, oh, don't, I'm blushing. I can't take all of this, positive energy on my work, but you must learn to endure it. Um, it's interesting hearing you say that because for me, I had a totally different perspective on this. You're right. It is something very much in the zeitgeist right now.
Mhm,
And you're right, like analog technology versus the coming of the AI and everything is a really important cultural issue, which I hadn't really been thinking about when I read this. When I read this, and I was thinking like, and I think like a writer who's sometimes competitive, and I think like, oh, what are they doing that I'm not doing, or what are they doing that I should be learning from? What
mhm,
I was really struck by in this poem is like the sound devices
mm,
and how exciting and exuberant the sound devices are, and how it's really appropriate because, when you're typing on a typewriter, you have that clackety clack clack clack, and so
mhm,
it's appropriate you have a poem that has this kind of rhythmic energy that sort of mimics the way the rhythm of the typewriter works.
yeah,
And I mean, also being a teacher
mhm,
of poetry, I work mainly with adult students, but I do work with kid students, younger
mhm,
students sometimes. I was also just thinking like, oh, this is the poem I'd bring in to show them about alliteration and slant
mhm,
rhyme
mhm,
and
mhm.
assonance and consonants and stuff. And
Wow.
so I was thinking, yeah, there's a lot going on here about the
Mhm.
craft of poetry
Mm,
and
thank
the
you.
style as much as the substance.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I think I mentioned when I read this for the reading that I was part of that you invited me to. I think I mentioned that I did type the first draft on a typewriter, and one of the things that really compels me to write drafts on a typewriter is that like there's no backspace, but also that the sound carries you along. I just love the sound of the typewriter. That clackety clack just brings me right back to my childhood. And when you're writing kind of just stream of consciousness and trying to come up with metaphors, it just pushes you forward. It's like propels you forward, like a motor almost.
Mm.
And you just want to keep hearing it. So it's like you get rewarded for typing those keys and not stopping. And you just kind of, and that's literally what I did. I just kept going and going. Um, and so maybe later on came the, oh, well, I could use slant rhyme here, or I could use a different word that would make the alliteration a little bit more apparent. Maybe that
Mhm.
came a little later, because poetry is artifice, right? And we do
Yeah.
have to put the craft in eventually. So, but I appreciate that you heard it, because I'm a I grew up in a fairly musical family. My dad played violin, my mom played piano, and one of my earliest memories is just listening to him type away while playing on the brown reel of his tape recorder,
Mhm.
um, a Beethoven symphony, or maybe some Broadway tunes. So yeah,
Mhm.
definitely some musicality crept in there, consciously or not.
I'm noticing you have, I believe, two typewriters behind you.
Mm-hmm.
That's what those are, right?
Yeah.
I am one who started on a typewriter. I mean, I think I got a typewriter when I was maybe 12 or something because we couldn't
Oh,
afford a computer yet. And then I didn't get a computer until my earliest memory of us owning a computer in the house was like maybe my senior year of high school. And we were behind. We were behind the times because we didn't have a lot of money, and I grew up kind of in the middle of nowhere. Um, but I love typewriters. I'm very familiar with them, and I'm curious, did you write the original draft of this on a typewriter?
yeah, I sure did. That's exactly what happened. And I there was a time when my daily writing practice would be to just journal on the typewriter, and then every now and then
Wow.
I would come up with some lines for a poem just in the process of hearing that clackety clack in my brain. And so yeah, this is definitely one of them that arose from
That's,
that practice.
man, if I still had a typewriter, I'm sure I could find one. Like, I would be so curious to see how typing on the typewriter changes what you create and like the feeling of writing because I have not typed on one for like I don't know 25, 30 years now, I think. I feel
I
like I
highly recommend.
heard a while ago that like Tom Hanks was working on this app to change to like make it so you can be typing on your phone but it sounds like you're typing on a typewriter. Is that true?
Yes, it is. Yeah, there is an app that, because he's a collector of typewriters. I think he has like 250,
Oh
and
my
he
goodness.
gives some typewriters away, like to people who write him letters on a typewriter. But yeah, you can type on it on your keyboard on the phone, and it sounds like a typewriter, and then you can change the font so that it looks like different fonts that you can get from a mechanical typewriter or a even electric typewriter. Yeah,
Yeah, that like mimics the sound, but the feel of it has got to still be very different typing on your phone. Like my
totally.
husband is always like making fun of me because I still type on the phone like someone who's not used to it. It's not my
Yeah.
first. Whereas his nieces, my nieces, or younger generation, like they're twice as fast typing on the phone and they just swipe, 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 swipe. Whereas I'm
Yeah.
still like, flack, 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 flack.
I know I don't use my thumbs, which apparently everybody does, but I just don't know how to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a different skill. It's like you're learning a different language, but it's the language of how you move your hands. And
For sure. Yeah, there's
do you
definitely a
ever
strong quality to it.
do you ever write by hand just to do something different, or does that change the pace of the writing for you?
I do. I love writing by hand. I love using old fountain pens too. And I
Mhm.
realized that the typewriter community also has a subsection of people who are obsessed with fountain pens. And I guess it's because of that visceral feeling of scratching across the page with the tip of a fountain pen and just going back again to the old ways of doing things. It's really,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just really curious how that happens. And I find that when I'm writing with a fountain pen, I do journal longer, and it seems easier
Mm,
for me to write. So the implement does have some effect on the writing practice. I recommend it. I recommend either writing on a typewriter, especially for someone like you who experienced it in childhood.
yeah.
It's kind of like the equivalent of a Proustian Madeline. It's like it
Yes.
brings you back because it's visceral, it's sonic, and it's also physical. The imprint you make on the paper is so, it's like you're making a stamp
Mhm.
world that wouldn't happen like in the computer on the computer. You don't really feel that visceral, physical stamp on the paper that you do with a typewriter. Yeah.
Yeah. This has been coming up more and more lately, probably because we are talking about it so much in the news, but the advent of AI and how that's changing
Right.
communication and writing and so forth. And I think I remember talking about this or this coming up as like when the printing press um, became a thing,
Mhm.
long, like what, 700 years ago or something. It's like people were very worried about that technology. They said now that everything's written, people won't memorize things. And so we're going to
Mm,
lose this whole cultural aspect of the tradition of memorizing long poems and
mm,
bards going around and reciting these poems.
right.
And to some extent we did, but then also now more people can read and stuff like
Mhm.
that. So
True. True.
um, yeah, with every loss of a technology, we gain something else, we lose something else.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, yeah, so I'm curious with your poem, uh, what this is a silly question a little bit, but like, what is it you hope people are going to get from it, hearing that praise of this, what seems to be an archaic technology?
Um, sorry, what was the question
Yeah,
again?
let me rephrase that a little more succinctly. It's like, you know, people reading this, especially like there may be some poets who have never used a typewriter before,
Mm, mm.
and they're getting the ode to the typewriter. Like, what do you hope they take away from it?
Well, obviously, I'm hoping that they'll be at least curious about these timeless machines and will try to find out more about them. And there's so much about them now on the internet since Tom Hanks started collecting them and just making a lot of news about them. Um, but just maybe to try to experience what it's like, or just
Hmm.
even if it kindles a little bit of curiosity about it, and question. I'm hoping that they will also question the authenticity of communication through digital means and how that is affecting our relationships. I mean,
Hmm.
the poem is clearly an ode. It's a praise for something that's long gone or obsolete or even deemed obsolete. But
Hmm.
for me, an ode can do many things. It can be an elegy. This is an elegy from my father on one level, but it's also an act of resistance against
Hmm.
technology and just the the urgency, the urgency that we feel to text someone back the minute we get it, or to, we or to answer an email the minute, like hours after. I mean, there's almost an expectation, like it's been 3 hours, they haven't written me back yet, and that
Yeah.
really stresses people out so much. We don't know how many personas we have to keep alive for all the different social media, for all the digital means of communication, and that
Hmm.
is down after a while. I don't know if you feel that way, but I feel like when I haven't answered an email, I feel so guilty. And so I want people to just slow down and think about, what are we doing? What are we
Yes.
doing in this, yeah, in this milieu with all
You know,
these,
there,
yeah.
there's a favorite poem I have that's called Slow Down. Um, and it's not by Marvin Bell. It's by another poet. Oh my God. The
Hmm.
name is on the tip of my tongue, but it's a great poem.
Look
It's
that up.
called Slow Down and it's by
Mhm.
something Bell.
Mhm.
But it's just like, it's something like speed. No, efficiency is not the point of your life,
Mm, mm.
but
Yeah.
walking. Oh, you know what it's called? It's actually called Walk, Don't Run.
Walk, don't.
And it's like, yeah, like walking leads to seeing. It's a favorite poem, but I cannot recite it line by line. It's a favorite
Oh,
poem that
yeah.
it maybe if we lived in the days before the advent of the written word, I would have had to memorize it to know it. But,
Mhm.
as it is now, when I think about that poem, I go back to where I have it written down and then I read it so I don't butcher it so badly. But it's a wonderful, wonderful poem about like how we need to slow down and getting so much done every day is not the point of your life,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
walking, which leads to seeing so that we know that the ground we walk on is holy ground.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Isn't
That's,
that great?
I will have to find that poem.
It's not hard to find. And if you just look, walk, don't run, poem, bell, I'm sure it'll be one of the first things
Mhm.
that pop up. But yeah, what you said put me in mind of that, obviously. And I want to ask a little bit more about the craft. You already talked about this a little bit about writing the first draft and then going back to tighten it up and look for different words. But I'm curious, do you frequently start with attention to the sound of a poem, or is that something that kind of comes afterwards? And um,
Mm.
and maybe an easier question too is like, what was the initial jolt for this one? Like, what started you thinking about the typewriter to begin with?
Well, after my father died, I started really actively seeking out old typewriters and collecting them. I had two typewriters at that point. I had one from a garage sale when we lived in Arkansas. It was a $5 Underwood typewriter that somebody said their grandmother used during the war. So I picked
Mm,
that up, and that traveled with me all over the States. I found one in Illinois at a church rummage sale, and that was a Remington. So those were my two typewriters. They were very old and crusty, and I'd never really used them except maybe a few times during a poetry event for Rhino where we would do poems on demand. But after my father died, I think that part of my grieving process was to just to go back to the things that I remember from my childhood with him, and
mm,
seeking out that particular typewriter he used, the Smith Corona Galaxy typewriter. And so I did that, and I was just really obsessed with going to garage sales and estate sales and thrift stores to find typewriters until I found the Smith Corona. Then my job was done after I had found it. And that just made me want to keep um learning about them and learning how to fix them
mm,
even. And I'm not the most mechanical person by any means, but there you can find
mhm.
all kinds of videos on YouTube that teach you how to fix change a ribbon or to just make small repairs. So I learned how to clean them and to make repairs. And I met some people in the community who would help me if I had a problem I couldn't figure out just from YouTube videos. So I kind of became like somewhat of an expert in cleaning and refurbishing old typewriters, which, there are not many of those around anymore.
No, that's really amazing. And it is funny how when these older technologies stop becoming so necessary,
Mhm.
that these things that used to be like you have to do this now become like your hobby,
Yeah, yeah,
like I get to restore typewriters because we're not making a lot of new ones. So you have to like,
exactly. Yeah,
it's like collecting antique cars or
yeah,
records, and you start to appreciate what you lost by going to the new technology. And so the old
absolutely.
technology becomes like elevated in a way.
Absolutely. There's like a planned
Yeah.
obsolescence in Apple computers or phones. I feel like after 2 years, 3 years, they break down and have to get a new one. But typewriters were
No,
built to last. They're
I
built to last
know.
through the decades. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's I mean that's one political thing we can all be behind is like outlawing planned obsolescence. It's such a
Mhm.
waste. It's so devastating to the environment and everything.
Exactly.
I'm so very frustrated by that kind of thing.
No.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I also liken it to the slow food movement. It's like, it used to be everyone was eating homemade bread because that was the
Mhm.
only kind of bread. And now you can go like what the French call pan industrial. It's like
Mm,
industrialized bread and it's
yeah.
quicker, but
Right.
it doesn't taste better. And so now it's like you go in Los Angeles, there's a wonderful restaurant called Lodge Bread in Culver City. I hope it's still there. It was
Lodge
still
bread.
there.
Mm,
Yeah, Lodge Bread. I'm gonna make a plug for them. Boy, I hope they're still there because they used to make bread the old-fashioned way, and I think they were
wow.
using wheat that was grown without all the, chemicals, and then they would
Mhm.
like slow rise everything. So the bread
Mm,
wasn't being made as quickly, and they charge more for it because it takes more
right.
time to make it. And when I discovered that bread, I'm just like, I'm never eating anything else. I would
Mm,
go
Mm.
there every week and get my week's bread. And, I don't have a lot of luxuries in my life. I don't spend money on um, things that are usually more high end, except for
Mhm.
coffee and
Yeah,
bread. I was just like,
that's pretty much all you need.
yeah, yeah,
In
but it's
some,
like you really appreciate what we lost when we all started going hyper manic, produce,
right,
produce, produce, more, 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 faster, faster. Really,
absolutely,
we really lost out on
absolutely.
some important things. Um,
But yeah, going back to your question about how I started the poem, I guess I just really at some point felt I needed um to somehow describe this feeling of how I was just so enamored of all these typewriters. I was just like, I
mm,
felt this at the peak of when I was still manically collecting and fixing them, and it literally made me feel so much alive at a time when it was really hard for me to be writing. After
yeah,
that, after I had long COVID, I really had a tough time getting back to writing. And this is
mm,
I have to thank my typewriter for making me want to be sitting on the chair and writing drafts every morning, because it was like I just felt the urge to write a poem was gone after
yeah,
I was sick for so long. And yeah, and the world just seemed to be spinning out of control into chaos. It still is. So this is a reminder to like just be grounded where you are, and just write what's
yeah.
true to you and what means the most to you. That's
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of folks will say that the best cure for anxiety or even depression is stuff like being active, like
Mhm, mhm.
actively using your energy and creating something of value.
Right.
I also, by the way, like highly recommend everyone feeling anxiety or depression, go to therapy too.
Mhm. Yes,
But,
of course.
this will definitely tell you, like, if you're upset about something, see how you could be active towards resisting it or countering it or just having some kind of
Mhm.
physical hobby that gets your hands and your body moving, will
Yeah,
just give you that sense of empowerment. Um,
true.
so I think my next question is about the ode aspect of this, because I noticed that you were writing and have been writing a number of odes.
Mhm.
Like Ode to Scoliosis was one of my
Right.
favorites that you read at the reading the other night.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about that. Are you intentionally trying to write an ode on the regular basis, or is that just kind of coming up naturally for you?
I think a little of both. The part that wasn't natural is that I tend to be in my first and second books, I tend to be narratively driven in my
Mm,
writing, or at least there's a linear arc through the poems. And I've been told by my teachers sometimes you need to disrupt the structure to see what you can come up with. And
mm,
one of the ways I learned in a workshop to disrupt that narrative or linear tendency is to write more lyrical poems. I think
mm,
the poems of Sharon Olds, and how she was also very much well, a narrative, not really narrative, but she definitely had narrative elements in her poetry.
mhm,
And after many, many years of doing that, she wrote a whole book of odes. And then after that, a book of arias, which those are the titles of her books, Odes and Arias. And so I
mm,
was thinking maybe she was doing the same thing. She was turning to the lyric poem to disrupt that tendency to tell a story, or to just to write more narratively. So I tried that, and I thought it helped. Another
mm,
way I tried to disrupt that was in my book. I write a number of self-portraits. That's
mhm.
another way to disrupt your narrative tendencies. Yeah, so just trying new structures and ways to jostle me out of my comfort zone, I guess.
Yeah, it's really fun talking to poets who are on their second or their third book, because there's like the way that we write that feels really natural when we get into it. And then
Yeah,
after a while, you get to a point where you're like, all right, what's next?
yeah,
I gotta
yeah,
find a way to keep this fresh and interesting and new. So
exactly.
and push it a little bit more. So it sounds like the ode was a way for you to like just kind of stretch yourself as a writer.
Yes, yes, definitely. I feel like at some point we get good at the things we do, and then we just end up imitating ourselves in a way.
Yeah.
because if we're musical, then we just keep writing musical poem. If we're image based, then the imagery becomes like put on a pedestal. But where's the rhetoric or questioning, the assertions? One of the things I learned is that, it's great to show, don't tell, but sometimes you do have to tell. That's
Yeah.
another way, yeah, to disrupt your showing, your patterns, is if you're a shower, then tell some more, and vice versa.
A poet I know who does that really well. Well, in a way that I notice, anyways, is like Longfellow.
Mm-hmm.
Longfellow has a poem called "The Psalm of Life," and he's an early American poet. And um, I remember when I was teaching English and social studies and American history, I brought in Longfellow's poem about the Psalm of Life, which is
Mm-hmm.
about how we should always be up, always doing, always active, always pursuing. I
Mm.
shared it with my students because I wanted them to know, like, this is kind of part of the American ethos, and this is
Mm.
what Americans were thinking at the start of the, revolution, post-revolution, and all that kind of stuff. But also, I had to talk to them later and be like, but he's not using a lot of imagery. I'm going to
Mm.
say show don't tell a lot this year in poetry class, and we can look at Longfellow, and he's famous poet, and this is a famous poem,
Mm.
but he's also basically just telling with rhyme.
Mm.
So we do have to keep in mind, like, there's many ways to be successful at poetry, and you're never going
Absolutely.
to satisfy all the poets and all of the aesthetic ambitions.
Sure, for sure. Yeah, there's room for all kinds of poets. Wait, didn't
Uh,
Longfellow also write the poem that starts, "I wandered lonely as a cloud"? Oh, the Daffodils poem. Was that Longfellow?
yeah, that's Wordsworth. That's
Oh,
Wordsworth, not too far off.
oh, Wordsworth. Okay, so it's Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and
I
it's
know, right?
William
Yeah,
Wordsworth.
they've got
I get them mixed up all the time. Okay, okay, so Longfellow. All right, but also a
well,
romantic poet.
yeah, probably. I mean, he would probably be classified as a transcendentalist, but the transcendentalist would also be classified as being like part of the romantic movement. So,
Oh,
yeah, it's
okay.
all kind of in the same zeitgeist there. And let's get back to nature, and very
Right.
human centered. And also, they were the poets who were backlashing against the advent of the new technology in the
Mhm.
1800s. So I wonder what they would think about what we're going through today. You
Wow.
know,
Wow.
I just
Right.
feel like you
Yeah.
really didn't listen, did you?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. History repeats itself, and we're
It
still
really
getting
does,
that
yeah.
the invective to keep walking, because the romantic
Mhm.
poets, they did walk a lot. They walked and walked and
True.
they wrote and wrote. They walked and they discovered things, described things in nature, and then came up with these ideas. Uh,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Coleridge, and who wrote the Albatross poem, Rhyme
That
of
I think
the
that
Mariner.
that was Rime of the Ancient Mariner. I believe that is Coleridge.
Coleridge and someone else. Was it
I'm gonna
Longfellow
tell
and
you.
Coleridge? Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, you know
Two
what? Yeah,
romantic.
it was Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and he was partnering with one of the other romantics.
Right, right.
Um, gonna be totally honest, it was not my favorite poem. Uh, I in high school, I loved my AP English teacher. She taught me so much about reading, but I think one of
Mm,
the challenges most teachers do is they start with like the old timey poets, and I really couldn't
right,
get into poetry until I discovered the modern poets writing in modern language, and
mm,
that's when I got really interested in it.
right, right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that I think brings me to my next question, which is now about the book. And I believe what you said about your new book in at our poetry reading was that this was written um, after your parents' death
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm.
exploring some of that. So would you tell us a little bit about that book? And then when you're ready, I'd love to hear the title poem from your collection.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. The book was actually written while my parents were still alive. My mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2012, and I started just writing poems to record the what she was going through, because it was such a stark difference from the mother that we knew when she was still
Yeah.
completely lucid. She was a physician, a very driven career woman. She loved her work. She was a hematologist, and she headed the blood bank in the Philippines, and she started a
Wow.
lot of new technologies that helped with blood transfusions. She started using this machine called apheresis machine, which can separate the components of the blood. Anyway, she was just really into her work, and so when she had to stop working because of all her dementia, she
Yeah.
was just really sad. She was lost. She wanted to go to work. She wanted to be out there doing things, curing people. And I would visit her every year in the Philippines, and I noticed her decline like from one visit to the next, and thought
Mhm.
it's important for me to record this. She was the historian of the family. She had all the stories about the war and growing up in the aftermath of World War II, and just all the stories even of my father's family. And so when she started to lose her memory, I said, this is my job as the poet in the
Yeah.
family, as the writer, to just extract as much as I can from her while she still has her memories.
Yeah.
And then my father also concurrently was diagnosed with prostate cancer. So each time I visited them, it was just a time to really spend with family, and to write as much as I could with what material I still had. So the book, it came about 3 months after they passed. What happened was, Martha Rhodes of Four Way Books contacted me and said, "Do you have a manuscript?" And I said, maybe I have enough poems for one, but I don't think I can write one. My parents just passed away a month ago, and I'm not ready to face, this large project."
Yeah.
And I called a friend, also a poet, Naoko Fujimoto. She's another co-editor at Rhino, and she said, "Are you crazy? That's Martha Rhodes. That's Four Books. You write that book. I'm giving you 3 days. You will send me all the poems you think can be in that book, and I will help you." It was just like, and she saved my life, just having
Oh,
that,
wow.
because I was in like the deepest depression after losing them, barely 2 weeks apart.
Hmm.
I sent her
Hmm.
the poems. She said, yes, this one, no, this one, but my mind was just in a big blur. I couldn't even look at those poems. She said,
Yeah.
we'll do it in this order. We will add 2 poems. You will write 2 poems about that will go in towards the end about, losing your parents. So I just did it. I just did it because I had
Wow.
someone. It's the power of friendships. I'm sure you know that the poetry world runs on support from each other. Like you and Robbie do a wonderful job running this series together. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like we need to support each other. God knows we don't get a lot
Yeah.
of support from the government. So we just need to give back as much as we can. And so yeah, the book was
Yeah.
completed, and Martha took it, and that's that. The rest is history, as they say.
I, I'm so interested in this because my background is in the psychology of creativity.
Oh
And
wow.
yeah, I have this interesting degree, and what I'll tell you is it's a lot of research that kind of verifies and quantifies what a lot of poets I think know intuitively.
Mm-hmm.
I got a lot from my degree, from my alma mater of Saybrook University, but also the main way I use it is in helping people get their creative breakthroughs and creative energy for
Oh
their
wow,
writing,
that's
because that's what I
wonderful.
care about the most. But like I think a lot of people will say, having a deadline or knowing who your audience is or something like that can kind of cloud the creative mind. It can be too much pressure. And
Mm-hmm.
yet there are some great examples, and I've talked to a few other poets who got a chance. They said somebody had reached out to them and said, "We want you to submit to this by this
Mm-hmm.
date," and they'll
Mm-hmm.
write a whole book.
Mm-hmm.
um, Martha Solano, a different poet, but she passed recently, and she had gotten this terminal diagnosis, and so she wrote her last book of poems. I think she said it was in like the span of a month, and every one of her
Wow.
poems in Terminal Surreal is just amazing and amazing, and she
Wow.
had a very real deadline that she was facing.
Mm,
Um,
I did not know
you
this.
know, yeah, yeah. So I
Power
mean,
of the deadline. Yeah.
it's not always advisable to do but sometimes it can give you a little too much pressure. But
Mm.
sometimes you can also use that as a way to put that little fire under your behind to get yourself
True,
moving on it.
true.
So I'm
Oh
really
yeah.
curious, being under this kind of deadline, like were you giving yourself prompts? Were you just writing every day what came to you, or how did that process work for you?
Well, I guess what happened was at that point I had already accumulated enough poems. They just weren't really um, written towards a manuscript or towards even the thinking of a manuscript. I was just writing for the past, I guess it was already about 10 years since my last, no. 2013 was my first book. Yeah, it was about maybe 7 years since the last book. So I just really culled all the poems that had been unpublished in the book since then. And an interesting thing happens when you start thinking poetry manuscript, because then,
Yeah,
you start seeing a narrative arc, you start seeing patterns, you start seeing thematic as well as craft patterns in your work. And and then you start seeing, oh, this can be a section and this one, not so much. This doesn't really fit. This fits. Because we are using the same sensibility, no matter how disparate the topics might be.
yes,
So the book, although ostensibly it's a book about losing one's parents, there's all kinds of loss there. There's children moving away to college. There's a favorite dog that died.
yeah,
There's just the loss that comes with just getting older,
yeah.
moving to a new place. So, it just somehow fell into place. So I don't know how you feel about coming up with a poetry manuscript, but I tend to feel that whatever we're writing, we're already writing a poetry book without even knowing
Yes.
it, you know?
I mean, I won't make it all about me, but I'm a person who processes by talking. Um, when I was working on my first manuscript, someone gave me
Mhm.
feedback that I needed to work more on understanding the order of poetry, and so I really went the order of like putting together a poetry manuscript. So I did a real deep dive into narrative structure, like the kind you look at for a novel, but also the
Mm,
kind you look at for poetry. And
mm.
I've since put together curriculum, which I called Build the Backbone of Your Book, and which I think
Aha,
I'm now going
nice.
to start calling Muses to Manuscript. But I've created a lot of lessons and
Mm,
questions based on reading a lot of manuscripts and seeing how they're put together. And like, I think
mhm,
there are certain things that every manuscript kind of needs.
mhm,
Um, and I find them in manuscripts. Like, I think every manuscript needs to have a poem where the speaker shows that this is what they're hopeful about. And every manuscript needs to
mhm,
have a poem where people, show that they're angry. And that one sometimes is very difficult, especially for women. And there needs to be some poem
mm,
that helps us feel like we've had a cathartic experience and can move on to the next steps.
mm,
Like
mhm,
a lot of the things that are in typical story structure are
mm.
useful in poetry manuscripts. So,
Yeah. Mm,
yeah, I've like kind of given myself those lessons. And so when I do work on a manuscript, I'm frequently just going back and being like, does it have this? Does it have this? It doesn't? Okay. Well,
mm,
then it's not
mm.
ready. Let's try writing those poems or let's put it aside until those poems percolate organically, you know?
Huh.
Um,
I
yeah,
love that idea. I love that idea of
yeah,
having something hopeful, something angry, some poem with a cathartic impulse. Because I've never really heard, I've read a lot about ordering a manuscript, and I've never really heard about certain key putting in certain keystone poems
yeah. Well, and
about
it's not,
how I'm feeling. That's really interesting.
well, there's no one way to do it,
No,
you
no, there's
know,
so many ways. There's so
which
many
is
ways.
why it's
Yeah, for
so
sure.
challenging for a manuscript. But like I
Yeah.
was a good student,
Hmm.
so I I just feel much more comfortable if someone can give me a checklist and I
Right.
can go through and say, check this off, and that's how I know it's complete.
Mm, mm, mm,
But you can read manuscripts and see that like there's some that don't have all of that. But for me, it's what helps me feel more complete and helps me feel like I get that catharsis.
that's
So
good.
um
That's
I
good to
did
know.
say I didn't want to make it all about me, but I've
Oh, this is good.
talked
This is
now.
good. No,
So
I've
let's
learned something. Thank you.
that is always nice when I can like share some useful insider information with other poets. Um, But I would love to hear the poem, the title poem from your manuscript.
Oh, I'd be happy to read it. Thank you for
Yeah.
asking. So the title kind of leads into the first line, so I'll just read it straight through. What happens is neither the end nor the beginning, yet we're wired to look for signs. Consider the peonies. One makes a perfect bud after months of nothing. Another's leaves are ringed with black rot. How can I not think end? How can I not say beginning? Leaves fall when days shorten because the tree must reduce to its tough parts: twig, branch, bark. My mother sleeps away the daylight. She nods off while chewing a spoonful of fish and rice, her head a peony gone to seed. Father calls to say she doesn't recognize him. Turning to him, she cried out, certain a stranger was in her bed. He played his violin till she slept, a leaf in late fall curling into itself. In autumn, chlorophyll disappears, canceling green from leaves so yellow and magenta can blaze. In my mirror, I see her, the smile that favors a cheek, eyes slanting in the shape of small fish we eat for breakfast. Trees know best the now of things. What goes on has been going on for centuries. Washing dishes, I rest a foot on my standing leg. A fork clangs on the tile. I rinse a cracked cup. I try not to think of endings.
Um, what what a heartfelt poem. Yeah, tell me a little bit about the genesis of that. I mean, I think in the poem I can see clearly what's going on in the speaker's life to inspire that poem. But say a little bit about how that poem came to be.
Well, the first line is actually from a yoga teacher. I was in this yoga class. We were living in Pasadena at the time, and they literally said, "What happens is neither the end nor the beginning." And then some wise thing about how it's just life, and that just really
Mm.
stuck with me. And I just started writing to that first line as a prompt, and I went to nature imagery, the peonies, and endings and beginnings. And then naturally, at the time, it was a time when my mom was already in late stage Alzheimer's. And all my thoughts would always drift back to that ocean of like, okay, the anticipatory grief of losing her and also being in the midst of the disease. So yeah, it's like what Frost says, where you just kind of a poem is like an ice cube on a hot stove. You just ride its melting or something like that.
Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've heard that quote before, but not in a while. Yeah, there's certainly a sense of urgency in that. You better write it real quick because otherwise it's
Mhm.
melting.
Right.
You know that
Right.
just the other day we were reading that I think it's a famous poem. We can call it a famous poem by Thich Nhat Hanh, "Call Me by My True Names," which
Uh-huh.
starts with something. I'm going to do a bad paraphrase again, but something like, "Don't say I am gone when I'm not even yet done arriving yet."
Wow.
And then he talks about, just basically, I am this thing and that thing. I am the mayfly that falls, but I'm also the bird that eats the mayfly. I'm the frog
Mm.
swimming happily in the pond, but I'm also the grass snake that feeds itself on the pond, on the
Mm.
frog in the pond. And just how, like, there is no end, there is no beginning. It's
Mhm.
all one thing.
Yeah, it's just a
And
circle. Right.
yeah,
That's beautiful.
yeah,
He's one
yeah.
of my favorite writers, Buddhist writers anyway. And yeah, thank you for invoking his name in the same breath as my poem. That means a lot to me.
Oh, well, they are, there's no point in comparing, but I'll say they're equally tender and beautiful, and I love the specificity, the real humanness. There's a real, I mean, I'm talking to you and knowing you writing this poem, so I'm I've obviously got some extra context there, but like, it's really rooted in a real person and their real experience. So it just feels like a very intimate poem, but also a very philosophical one.
Thank you so
And I'm
much.
curious, were you raised with a lot of Buddhist teachings?
It was really, well, I was raised Catholic, and I guess I just came to meditation and, Zen Buddhism much later in life, living here in the
Hmm.
US, taking classes, taking meditation classes, just out of a sense of need to just
Yeah.
slow down and try to monitor my anxiety a little bit better without having to do it chemically if possible. I mean, I'm not going to say that that chemical, like drugs are bad for depression. Sometimes we need them. We need that extra.
Yes. Yeah.
But if there's any natural way we can do it, then I'm all for it. So yeah, I came rather late in life, but it's been a big part of my writing and life. I mean, poetry and life are so interconnected, right? It's like the air we breathe.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing I really have always appreciated about Buddhism and I guess psychology too. It's like you can
Mhm.
absolutely study them without abandoning the religion uh, that you grew up in or any other religious teachings.
For
Um,
sure. Yeah.
Buddhism and meditation, it's all about the breath. We all breathe, no matter what
Hmm.
religion you were raised in, so it's okay to understand more about how to slow down and how to be more mindful and things like that.
That's
Um,
right. Yeah. Yeah, for
yeah.
sure.
I think another useful question is as you were working on this particular book, I know you were doing the culling and the collecting of the poems in a, kind of sped up fashion, but were there any particular books you were looking at for inspiration? Any other poems that were on books of poetry that were on similar topics?
Mm, not really. Not that I can recall. I mostly I was leaning on what I had learned in graduate school. One of my mentors was Ellen Bryant Voigt, and she always said every book is like a poem. You need a good middle poem to
Hmm.
anchor, and then a beginning and an end. So I was really just thinking of, okay, what's my anchor here? What's the center of this book? And then what's a good beginning poem? What's a good ending? And then she said, just put that on your ironing board, and then just find the middle parts. As soon as you have the beginning and
Mm,
end, you can just find what comes in the middle. And for some reason, Naoko and I agreed we wouldn't have sections in this book. So at that time, I have to admit, I was just not in the mindset of reading a lot of books. I think I was just really in the throes of grieving and depression that I just needed structure. And I think we talked about
yeah.
this earlier, like the structure of a deadline, the structure of like what Ellen had taught me about beginning, middle, and end, and just someone also like who had my back, who said we're going to finish this book together. So yeah, that helped. And then
Yeah.
just having that room to go into every day that I'm working on this manuscript now. This is my daily practice. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really powerful, I think what you're saying. And I've learned this more and more the more I live and write and share poetry. It's like the real payoff for this is the friendship you
Mhm.
make along the way, because it might take forever before you
Mhm.
become a famous poet, before you
Mhm.
win a pushcart or, get 10 years a professor or whatever it is your goal as a writer is. But, the friendships can be immediate.
Yes.
And getting
Yes.
someone calls you up and says, "You did a good job today," or "I'm happy with this poem," or "This poem
Yeah.
really moved me," like
Right.
that could hold you over for a long time while you're waiting for the accolades of the world to get to you,
Oh,
you know?
absolutely. No, that's for sure. And friendships are lasting. So is poetry, but those small victories along the way, that's what keeps you going. And I have to say,
Yeah.
I was a pretty much a late bloomer. My first book didn't come out till I was like what, in my mid to late 40s, I feel. And I had always been of the mindset that it's not about getting the first book out immediately. I always
Yeah.
wanted to have a, a really good book I could be proud of.
Yes.
And I wanted it to be all killer, no filler. I didn't want it to be just like, these are all the poems I published, and here are the almost published. I just really wanted it to be a good book. And so, yeah, I didn't really want to rush things.
That is so useful. And I think Robbie Nestor said something similar in our interview with her. Like she was writing for a long time, and a lot of the first poems that she wrote, she wound up not even putting in her first book or not even publishing
Mhm.
at all. Because, the first couple of years, you really are writing just to learn about
Yeah.
the writing, hopefully. And I
Yes.
love what you say, all killer, no filler. Like that's raising the bar. But I also feel like the more you do it, the easier it comes. Like my first book I was working on solidly. My first
Mhm.
book, When the Moon Had Antlers, I was working on solidly for like 10 years, I think,
Mhm.
before it
Mm.
finally got accepted. And I was
Wow.
on book tour with that when I got word that my second manuscript was a finalist for Harbor Review's Laureate Prize. You
Wow,
know,
congratulations. That's
Thank you.
awesome.
Yeah,
That's
but
great.
well, it didn't win, which means I can list it as a finalist, but it's just sitting there on my hard drive.
Still a winner.
But
It's still a winner.
it is. Thank you for saying that. But
Oh, I mean,
it,
yeah, I just want to say that once you're a finalist, all those books are publish worthy, but they have to pick one. And they're all
yeah,
of the same caliber. That's how I see it. It's just a
yes,
matter of just putting it back in the mail, putting it
in
back.
circulation. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
definitely feel that way. We've been talking about that a lot with folks at the poetry salon. Like, I want to read this book, but it's only a finalist. No one's published it yet, so I have to wait for it to come out before we can read it. But um, that oh my gosh, I know I had another specific question. Oh yes, yes. The other question I have about the poem that you just read is this is the title poem, and I think this is something that's so hard for so many of us choosing a title for a manuscript or choosing a title poem for the manuscript. So I wanted to ask what made you decide that this was the title poem?
Um, well, I think first of all, the content of the poem seemed to pull together a lot of the central themes of the book. Which I already said, the backbone of the book was losing my mother to Alzheimer's and my father to cancer and that loss. But also the the timelessness of just beginnings and endings. There's just nothing,
Yeah.
there's really no beginning, no ending, which is why the book has a braided structure. There are no sections and there's really no narrative or linear arc. So I thought that was a good representative of what the book in as a whole was trying to do.
Yeah.
I'm not a good title maker. So Naoko is really good, my friend Naoko, because she is a native Japanese speaker and English is her second
Mm,
language. She writes beautiful poetry in English and she does graphic visual poetry too. She helped me with the title because initially I think I had what happens is neither the end. And she said, why don't you just do what happens is neither? Because it just sounds a little bit more interesting to just chop it off at a very unexpected place. And I thought, wow,
yeah.
that's really interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that. But it takes someone who's not an English speaker to think, I can do this. It doesn't matter if it's not grammatical. It actually invites the reader to come in and like, what is this phrase? Why is it hanging there? And hanging on neither is really neither this nor that. That's really what
Hmm.
that's where we are. We are in that liminal space between
Yes.
death, life, living, dying, light, dark. It's there. It's there that the poetry has sprung out of that liminal space.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is so interesting. I was talking about this with um, Nikki Fragala Barnes, who you
Mhm.
co-featured with, and so who you met the other night. And we were
Yeah.
talking about language and how studying different languages makes you reconsider what language can do and can't
Mhm.
do. And you're absolutely right. Like getting other people's impression, like someone who's not a native speaker, um, can make you question so many of your own language decisions, and studying
Mhm.
another language can make you reconsider how your own language is constructed. And
Right.
so I assume you speak more than one language. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, I speak Filipino, Tagalog.
Uh-huh.
I also speak a little Spanish because in the Philippines, it used to be required for us to learn Spanish in high school
Yeah.
and also in college as part of the language requirement. It's changed now. You can choose now. But because we were colonized by Spanish for 300 years, And our national hero was a writer, and he wrote in Spanish. He went to Spain to study and then came back and started writing revolutionary articles against the Spanish in Spanish. So,
Yeah,
yeah, so then we had to read his work and we had to learn Spanish.
that's
So,
so ironic, isn't it? We're writing against the Spanish in Spanish.
yeah,
Tell me the name of that writer.
the national hero,
Yes, yeah.
Jose Rizal.
Because I think the poet MT Vallarta, who I had on the podcast like over a year ago now, like she also brought him up,
Oh,
if I remember correctly. And
huh,
yeah, so that's been kind of floating around my mind.
cool.
I'll be totally honest, I've not had the time to read um their manuscripts, but I'm like a little bit familiar with like some of the themes and things like that.
Hmm,
And
hmm.
yeah, maybe that'll be my next project for like when I have little free time is reading some of the at least his manuscript because it is like so interesting to think of like a a poet or a writer being the national hero of the country. I mean, that's got to be
Right.
doing something really phenomenal there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So MT Vallarta, is he a Filipino American poet?
They
Eh,
are a poet who teach at one of the universities in California, and I don't want to get it wrong. I think I remember which one, but I don't want to get it wrong. But definitely look up MT Vallarta. You can look up MT Vallarta on the Poetry Salon cast.
Okay, I
And
will. For the
yeah,
rec.
I their book I believe came out from Harbor Review as well, and has a lot of fragmented writing in it. And
Mhm.
yeah, I could say a lot more, but I don't want to like misquote them. And as you can tell, I have a lot in my head that floats around in this vague space. I think I remember that quote, but not quite. I think I remember that fact, but not quite. I know this person's last name is Bell, but I forgot so I don't.
Same. I'm in the same boat.
Well, I would presume you're an avid reader. I know I'm an avid reader, and that just means like sometimes it all gets stuffed in there
Right.
uh,
Yeah, there's so
without
much
it
information.
being easy to access. So
Sure.
um, yeah, so the one of the other questions I wanted to ask too about this manuscript is and I think you've already touched on it a little bit, but when did you feel like it was finished and how, I mean, it sounds like it was mainly the deadline that
Yeah,
was certainly was working for you there, but was there
yeah.
anything you felt like you needed to say or anything you discovered as you were putting together the manuscript as a whole?
That's a really good question. I think what made it click into place for me was that I needed to write a poem about my father's death, which
Mm,
I was avoiding for the longest time.
yeah,
And when I had written that poem, and it's called Last, there was a last poem too
yeah.
that got into the book. It it made me feel a sense of, okay, now um I've really told everything.
Mm,
Um, it was really hard to write that poem. It's about how I was leaving the Philippines after he died and bringing his violin with me, and
mm,
it was just really hard for me to write about his dying, but writing about the violin as a metaphor for like taking a part of my father with me, leaving the Philippines, coming back to the US, made me feel a sense of, yes, I've done my job. I've told the story now, and
mm.
we can call this manuscript done.
Yeah. You had said something else that I want to circle back to, which is that, you're the poet of the family. So it's your job to do the writing about all of this.
Hmm.
But of course, every family has parents and grandparents who pass, and they don't all have poets to do the recording and the writing.
Hmm.
Um, so I mean, do you feel like every family needs one, or do you feel like this was something that sort of like um, maybe helped your family uh, process the grief?
Hmm. That's a great question. I feel a little embarrassed to have called myself the poet of the family. That just came out, but I don't know if my siblings will agree. I think that there are many ways to be the poet of the family. My brother
Mm,
is a musician. He plays the piano, and all through my growing up years, he would just play the piano and we'd all come together and sing in different voices. And all the way up to the end of my parents' life, we always had these gatherings where there was always a piano, and everyone gathered there. And there's so many
Mm,
memories hooked onto all the songs that we sang through the 70s, 80s, 90s that's always come up. And then you can be the artist of the family in terms of
yeah.
somebody who likes to draw or paint, or somebody like my sister who loves to make quilts. And so there are many ways of telling a story. You don't need a poet. And it just happens to be my medium. So,
Yeah, I love the way you put that because, obviously poetry is my medium as well, and it's the one I study the most. But I really want to be egalitarian with all of us artists and all of the ways that humanity expresses itself. Like poetry is
mhm,
my medium, but I'm not going to say poetry is the best. I don't even want to make a hierarchy of it, you
mhm,
know?
yeah,
Um, but there are all kinds of ways to honor or document or process
mhm,
a family member. It might be like woodwork, it might be like collecting recipes, it might be
right,
anything that honors a person. So
yeah,
thank you for articulating that. That's really important for people who don't have a poet in the family to know that there are other
right,
ways.
yeah.
Yeah.
What I'll say for poets though is that if someone can articulate a feeling in a way that's not sayable in any other way of writing, whether that's prose or just record keeping, then maybe that allows a kind of freedom of expression of the grief, because
Mm,
some people might not know, oh, that can be said in that way, or I never knew I was feeling that until I read that.
yeah.
So I guess that's what we poets can give, is a way of saying the unsayable.
Yeah.
That's my hope.
Yeah, absolutely. It puts me in mind, my grandmother passed, it's been like almost a decade, and I can't believe it's been that long. But I remember
Mhm.
when she did, like my one of my cousins who's more of a visual artist had taken all of her clothes. And
Mm.
instead of like donating them to the thrift store or something like that, she took all of her clothes and she cut them apart and made this art installation using all of her clothes. So it was like you could just
Oh,
kind of be draped in all of her, and then my mom,
beautiful.
my
Wow.
mom, who's a visual artist in a different way, like I was just at her house helping her do some cleaning up, her and my dad's house, and like going through and like, Mom, can we give this to the thrift store? Can we give this to the thrift store? We need to clear some space. And then there's this one like sweater hanging up on my mom's closet. And I'm like,
Mhm.
your style, I think this even fits you. And she's like, no, no, that's grandma's. We're keeping that there. And all of a sudden she
Mhm.
said it, and it was like the whole image of my grandmother appeared.
Oh,
I could sense
wow.
it just from like seeing that sweater and remembering
Mhm.
that's right, she did used to wear it. This is like how she looked. This was her shape.
Oh,
This was her
wow.
style and everything. So it's like
Oh my gosh, I just
just so
got
many
goosebumps.
ways. I
Yeah.
know, right?
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, the power
Yeah.
just of things. And I think it was Seamus Heaney who said, um, small things can bear the weight of anything. So
Ugh,
the weight of your grandmother's memory was just like suddenly like just invoked by seeing that sweater. That's amazing.
yeah. But
There's
can
a
I tell
poem
you
in
something?
that for sure. There's a
Like
poem in that. Yeah.
I had that thought, but I was so busy, like just with the task of the day, that I hadn't really thought about it until just
Mhm.
now that you and I are talking. And now I'm
Yeah,
like taking that little thought that was there and putting it in front of myself and really looking at it. And that's,
right.
what poetry does is like I'm putting it into words now and really processing it only now. So,
Exactly. That's the power of these kinds of conversations. We need to
mm,
get together with our tribe and speak this language, because this is how we unearth things from our unconscious.
yeah.
Doesn't happen
Well,
in everyday conversations.
speaking of tribes, something else that I realized that kind of connects us is that you live in San Diego right now, which is where I was born.
Mhm.
Um, but you went to school at Warren Wilson, which that's in North Carolina, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. But it's a low residency program, so you could practically live anywhere to go
Oh,
there.
wow.
Yeah.
So, but you did have to come out here in person a couple times, right?
Twice a year. Yeah. It
Oh,
was
wow.
it's Wananoa, up in the mountains. Yeah, it was lovely. So we would go there 10 days in January, 10 days in July, and then in between we would communicate with our mentor by post or by email, whatever they preferred. Yeah.
Oh, that's so fantastic. Yeah, I'm still new to North Carolina, but I'm just discovering like we have a lot of cultural and literary richness out here, and like Warren Wilson is one of those
Yeah.
places of
Whereabouts are
cultural
you?
richness.
Are you near
I
Asheville?
No, unfortunately, and we love Asheville. We kind of
Okay.
wish we could be there, but there's a lot more going on, a lot more opportunities out in the Research Triangle, the Raleigh,
Oh, sure.
Durham, Chapel Hill area, and then we actually live midway between those two places in what's called the
Nice.
Triad. So we're
Uh-huh.
in Winston-Salem, which
Uh-huh.
yeah, calls itself the city of arts and culture. And it's very
That's
small, but
great.
I will say it's got a number of really cool things going on, even for a small city. So I mean, eh,
Yeah.
I've got good things to say about it.
Sure.
So
And you're
yeah,
close to the universities out there,
yeah,
so it's a good place to
yeah,
be. Yeah,
yeah,
for
absolutely.
Mhm.
Well, if you are ever out here, if you ever want to return to Warren Wilson, if they ever invite you out to do a reading or whatever, I really hope we get a chance to meet in person or next time I'm in San Diego because I still have friends
Absolutely.
out in that area.
Yeah, give me a
Yeah,
holler. We're up in Oceanside in North County, San Diego, but I would be down for lunch or dinner or a cup of coffee, whatever you have time for. Please, please call me when you're out here. Yeah.
absolutely. So I think that brings us to over the hour mark. I always
Wow.
hope that these can be under an hour, and they never are. They never are. But hopefully, folks who are listening have enjoyed our conversation. Angela, is there anything else you want to plug? I know you have your book, but you want to take a second and tell us a little bit about Bone Flute, the other book that you've been working on.
Sure, yeah. So Bone Flute is a posthumous collection of a dear poetry friend that I had while I lived in the Bay Area in the early 2000s. And she and I became lifelong friends because we met at a Stanford Continuing Studies poetry class that was taught by Nan Cohen. And they became my poetry tribe all the years I had lived in the Bay Area, which was about 14 years. But even beyond that, Irene and I remained in touch. And she wrote the most beautiful, evocative poems but never published them. She published one poem in Rhino in 2015, I want to say. But other than that, she never really wanted to submit poems or like publicize them. And after she died in 2023, her husband asked me to cull together enough poems for a full-length collection. She left
Hmm.
2,500 poems. So it was quite a task to go through all those poems. But
Oh,
yeah, yeah. I'm sorry?
how long is the book?
Well, the book is about 100 poems. So we really
Okay.
had to winnow it down. I had help from my Rhino co-editors, Gail Gepford and Naoko Fujimoto, and my son Tim, who's a programmer as well as a writer, artist. He helped me just narrow down the database to dedupe certain files that were drafts of each other. And then
Hmm.
using the Rhino method of like rating poems from 1 to 3, we culled it down to all the ones that would make a coherent and excellent poetry manuscript. And it's published by Paloma Press out of the Bay Area. They're an independent poetry publication, well, not just poetry, but it's the only Southeast Asian press in the Bay Area, but they published all kinds of books. We're launching the book in Palo Alto this Tuesday, July 2, or Wednesday, July 2, at 7 p.m. at Books Inc. in Palo Alto. So if you're in the area, I hope you'll come out and join us.
Oh, that's so fantastic. And yeah, talk about being part of a community and I wanted to say kind of like a taste maker and an elevator of other voices. You're really doing a lot with Irene Adler's book. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Yeah,
Yes,
with
thank
her
you.
book, Bone Flute, and with Rhino, and then with your own poems telling your own story. I just want to say thank you for what you're doing for the poetry community, and thank you for taking time off what must be a very busy schedule to come talk with me.
It was a real pleasure talking with you. And I feel like I've been talking to one of my tribe, and I didn't even feel 1.5 hours passing, but here we are.
I know, right?
Yeah, so
This
much.
happens at the poetry salon all the time. Occasionally, like, folks will come on and we're like a small group and we can be talking for like an hour about one poem or two poems.
Mm,
And it
mm,
feels
mm.
like we look up and it's just like, has that much time passed? We're having so much fun. So
Yeah.
thank you again. And again, I really hope I get to see you sometime in real life, in analog. Um, and I hope at one point I'll be able to get a copy of Foam Flute and an in-person copy of your book as well. And just thank you for being here.
Thank you, Tresha. Real pleasure talking to you.
Okay, and we're going to have the fun of finding the record stop button. Okay, thank you, listeners. Thank you for tuning in with us.
Bye.